Hi and welcome to the sew along for the top. So I'm going to be sewing this today in a woven fabric. Our seam allowances are 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch. You're going to need a way of finishing the edges. I'm going to use an overlocker to tidy the edges on the raw edge of the fabric. You only need 3 threads, but I'm going to use 4 threads because I like the look of that. And let's just get stuck straight into this. Fabrics recommended are nice soft summer weights that'll flow a little bit like a rayon or a cotton poplin, and let's just get started. So because we are sewing a woven today, please make sure your iron is plugged in. We're going to be doing a little bit of pressing as we go. With woven fabrics, it's always a good idea to sew a seam and then press a seam. Make sure you test your temperature with a spare piece of fabric before you begin. So let's just get started on the darts. So take your front piece and place it right side up. On the side seam here you will see 2 notches. So what we want to do is fold our fabric so it is right sides together, and we want to match those notch points there. So holding those notch positions on top of each other, come along until you find the drill hole. So the drill hole is here. What we're going to be doing is sewing our dart in place. So our dart will run from the notch position here to 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch past the drill hole. And what we do is we keep our drill hole on the very fold of our fabric like so. So the easiest way is just to show you. Start at the notch position like so and run a small back tack. Then just arrange your work so that that drill hole is right on the fold, and if you look, it should be on the straight grain of the fabric there. So you just have to imagine a straight line directly from there to 1 centimetre past that drill hole position and sew to it. And then when you come off the edge of the fabric, just back tack a short way, and that will give us our dart position like so. So go ahead and repeat that on the other side. We're going to put right sides together, and match those notches. Then we're going to find our drill hole, and that drill hole needs to be on the fold of our fabric. Secure that. Rearrange the work, and then stitch to 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch past in a straight line. Now go to your iron and press those darts so they face towards the hemline. So now let's work on the shoulder seams. Place your front and your back right side together and match the shoulder seams. So sew those together at 1 centimetre and then go to your overlocker and tidy the raw edge. Once you've tidied up the raw edge, go to your iron and press those seams so they face towards the back of your garment. To finish our neckline off, I'm going to do what's called an internal binding. Basically it's just a binding that's been turned to the inside and stitched down. So if you have a binding attachment, you could just as easily not do the shoulders, zip through some binding and then turn it to the inside. It will give you a really good result too. But this is just as easy, a little bit fiddlier. So what we're going to do is take our neckband piece, right sides together, and sew a seam at 1 centimetre. Then we're going to fold this so that we have wrong sides together, and that seam is going to become our centre back neck. So here is the neck area of my garment, and the double notches here show me that that's the back. There's a single notch here to show me the front. So what I'm going to do is place that seam directly in the centre of the double notches, like so. And I'm going to secure that in place with a pin. As we work our way around this piece, you will see notches, and the notches show us the join position. So the notches are for the shoulders and the centre front. So the notches here will match like so, and so on and so forth. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start on the left shoulder on the back. So I've just matched those 3 raw edges together. Remember, we've pressed that seam towards the back, and I'm going to start sewing 6mm, 1/4 of an inch seam. And all I'm going to do is make sure this is just evenly distributed in a nice smooth curve between that shoulder point and that centre back neck. And I'm going to stitch it down. Now I'm just going to find my notch position for my next shoulder. Match the notches, and match the notches to the shoulder. I'm going to rearrange my work, and as you can tell, I'm sort of straightening the curve out. I'm making the curve into more of a straight line just to make it easier to help me sew and continue stitching. Now we're going to work our way towards the centre front. Find the notches. And now we're just working our way back to our beginning point on the shoulder. Okay, so this is what we've got so far. So this is the back and this is the front. So we're going to now stitch through the bulk of this to create a roll to the inside. Now some people call this understitching. It is known in the home sewing community as understitching in the US. I believe, I could be wrong there. We call it pin stitching in industry. It creates roll. So what we're going to do is I've come back to my starting position, and you want to stitch, so we want to fold this back on itself, and we want to stitch through all the bulk. You don't want any bulk on this side, so we want to make sure all the bulk is on the same side, and it's going to help create a roll to our neck. And it is only just in from the edge. It is exactly the same stitch as an edge stitch. It's called a pin stitch, but edge stitching is a top stitch. Pin stitching is for facings. So it's really just a terminology thing. You could, of course, do this with pre-made bias binding. You may find it easier. Okay, so we're coming up on our start position, and as you can tell, it looks pretty similar to a bias binding, a standard bias tape. going to trim the edge there. So our next step with this is to roll this again to the inside and stitch it down. So what we've done with that previous pin stitching is it just helps create a beautiful roll to the inside so it won't be seen. So you can choose to stitch this from the wrong side on the edge. I'm going to stitch mine, I can stitch it from the wrong side on the edge, why not? Let's try that. Normally I stitch it from the top so I can see what I'm doing, but it really doesn't make a difference. Right, so I'm coming back to the position I started at, and actually no, I will stitch it from the right side. Habit, I suppose. I can control any buckling that way, it is bias after all. So roll that to the inside and make sure that that's pushed onto the edge, and then choose a width that you want to sew it. Now we are really looking for 6mm, 1/4 of an inch, but that may change depending on how you've managed to sew that in the fabric that you've chosen. So all we're going to do now is stitch around the same, really important to keep the same width from the edge. Back to our starting point. Remember to backtack. So there is our neckline finished. Go and give that a press and we can move on. For the belt, we have 2 of them. Place them lengthwise right sides together so we have a fold. And we're going to sew the long edge at 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch. Now when you get to this edge here, you want to stop with your needle down 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch before the end, lift your presser foot, turn and pivot, and then rearrange so that we're parallel here and we'll stitch down to that edge. And remember to back tack. And to help you turn this, it's probably a good idea that you just trim off the edge like so. Make sure you leave a small gap, 1/8 of an inch there, and then turn that piece through. And when you turn it through, make sure the corners are all pushed out to the edge beautifully, and then give it a press with your iron. And when you press this, make sure you press this with that edge pushed all the way to the edge. So get your thumbs and roll it out and press that down, and then repeat for the other tie. So we're going to sew the side seam and sew our belt in as we go. If you place your front right side up and look down the side seam, just below the dart here there's a notch, and there is also a notch in the center of our belt, so we're going to match them like that. Now with these ties, sorry I called it a belt, it's a tie, we actually have them facing the same way. So when you sew them in, you want them facing opposite ways like this. You want them to be like that when it's being worn, otherwise you're going to end up like that when it's being worn. So make sure before you actually sew them in, you place them so that they are opposite each other like that. And then when you have that in the correct place, make sure you don't get it messed up, and put one on the left and one on the right. So we want that there. I hope that made sense. And the other one on the right. So it doesn't matter whether you have the short side in or the long side in. I prefer short side in, but when they're in, that's how we want them to look. So you can tack stitch that in if you want to. I don't really think there's a need to tack stitch it in. Just hold it in place temporarily with a pin. So that's the front. And then place the back to it so we have right sides together, and match the notch at the back as well. Like so. On one side. And on the other side. Now when you sew the side seam together, just make sure your belt's out of the way. We only want to catch the belt at the side, and the length of it can be a bit annoying. So starting at the underarm point, match that. Remember, we have right sides together. You'll have a notch here that matches to the top of your dart. And then make sure everything is sitting nice and flat, like so. Bring this over the top so all our notches match, and sew through. And then sew all the way down to the hemline. Now I get a bit paranoid, I suppose is the word, about ties in case they snap. So what I'm going to do is just sew a second line of stitching exactly on top of the first line, just back tacking it there, just to secure that into the side seam. So once you've done that on one side, repeat it on the other side. So, want of a better description, my ties are now seam side up. If you prefer it, you can have them seam side down, fold side up. Okay, so go to your overlocker and overlock tidy that edge, and then press the seams towards the back. Oh, I just realised I didn't go over that again there, so I'll just quickly go over that now. Now because I'm here and it's easy, I'm going to put the hem in. There is a 1 centimetre hem allowance allowed for. I'm going to overlock the raw edge and then turn it up by 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch. You could do a double fold if you wanted to. You could certainly cut this hem deeper if you wanted to. I do feel a 1 centimetre hem is all that is required. So I'm going to overlock tidy the raw edge. Make sure those hems are pushed towards, sorry, the side seams are pushed towards the back. So if you feel the need to, you could press this before you sew it. I'm just literally going to turn it up and stitch it at the 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch line, directly through my overlocking line. Alright, so go to your iron and press that, and we can move on. So now let's work on the sleeve. Place your sleeve right sides together, and we're going to sew this long seam at the underarm. Now part way down you'll have a notch to match. Now when you come to the end here, there'll sort of be a triangle overlap here. As long as the stitch line at 1 centimetre meets exactly where they meet, that's what you're looking for. So this is what we're looking for, like this. Now go ahead and overlock that seam, and then repeat for the other sleeve piece. So once you've overlocked the edge like this, you want to press this, and you want to press it towards the back of the sleeve. So the side that is the back is the side here that has the double notch cut out of it. So you want to press that facing that direction. Now we're going to run a gathering thread at the hem area. So it's a good idea to lengthen your stitch length from normal, and make sure you start off with a bit of extra thread. So don't stitch through the bulk of that seam there, but just start at the seam and stitch a gather stitch line at 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch, from there all the way back to the same position on the other side. Now let's prepare the band that we're going to sew this gather into. Take your piece, place it right sides together, and stitch a seam on the short edge. Now you'll find it easier if you go to your iron and press that open before you go any further. Now on one of those long edges, press over by 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch to the wrong side as well. So around our band you'll see notches. This band is quartered, and around the lower edge here you'll see notches, and this is quartered as well. So what we need to do is draw up the gather to match those notch positions here on our band. So make sure when you gather from the wrong side. All I'm going to do is start off by gently drawing up like so. At the moment I'm not measuring it, I'm just doing a general gather. Be gentle, take your time. Alright, so as you can tell I haven't been measuring that, I've just drawn it up just to remove some of the bulk I'm working with. Okay, so take this band and make sure we have right sides together and place it inside the lower area. So we want right sides together, and at this stage all we want to do is match the seams here and pop a pin and pop them at right angles like so. Then come around and match the first notch position. So just have a look through your gathering, find the notch position, find the first notch and match that together. And repeat for the remaining notches. Now when you're going to stitch gathering into place, it's always a good idea to stitch it so that the gathering is on top. So for this sleeve, what I have to do now is turn the whole thing through. And now I've come back to my beginning point here, which was my seam. So now we're going to draw up those gathers to fit that area. Now remember I said make sure you gather from the wrong side. It makes it so much easier when we're at this point here. So what I'm going to do, making sure that those seams are directly on top of each other, I'm just going to secure my beginning point just with a few stitches backwards and forwards. Right. So you can see this is the extra I need to draw up. So now I find it really easy to just do this. And then, what is also quite handy is to use a pair of long nose tweezers here, just to arrange this all. And now I'm just going to stitch on top of my gather line. Now if you feel the need to take out those gathering threads, feel free to do it. And just check your work. So if you didn't previously press up the other edge, now's your time to do it. So make sure you've pressed that edge up by 1 centimetre there. What we're going to do is now roll this over on top of itself and stitch it down. So we want to create just a mini cuff like so. So we're going to be putting that fold edge over, and when we stitch it we want to make sure it stitches pretty much exactly on top of our gathering stitching, and you want to hide all of the mess inside that band like so. So just take your time and go around and make sure it's all sitting properly before you start sewing it. There are notches to match, because what can happen is this can twist out of place. So if you need to, there are notches to match as you go. Now you're probably wondering what I've just done. What I did was I pinned that from the inside, and then I pinned it again from the outside, just so I could adjust the widths and make sure that when I stitch that I'll be stitching in the correct place. So what I'm looking for is I want the width of this band to be consistent all the way around, and the width you're looking for is, yes, 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch. And once you've got that in place, what we're going to do is a stitch in the ditch. When you stitch in the ditch, it's easier to do it. Well, it looks better if you've done it from the right side. So the best way to do that is to turn your garment inside out. So turn your garment inside out and then come to the seam position here. We're going to start on that seam line. So stitch in the ditch means to stitch at the very edge, and then when you come away, what will happen is, so you open it up, you stitch right on the edge there, and the stitches sort of fall into the grain of the fabric, and this will push back on itself. So when we stitch on this side, we want it to be invisible, but on this side we want it to be right on the very edge here of the fold. So that's why I double pinned this. So when you're ready, just get started. So effectively what we've done there is create a band. You could also use binding tape if you struggle with this. There's not a problem with that either. You just need to work that out for yourself. Okay, so let's finish the same thing on the other side, and then we can sew the sleeves into the armhole. So to sew the sleeves for this view, we're going to start off by securing our edges first. So take your sleeves, and the upper sleeve is what we're going to start work on. You have two upper sleeves. We cut them as a pair. We cut one this way and we cut one this way. So what I'd like you to do is just overlock the short edges on both of those pieces, right on the edge, just to secure it. Now let's look at the lower sleeves, and we'll have two rectangles that look like this. On the longer edge you'll see a notch at the top and at the bottom. So we need to overlock the edges without the notch. So here's my notch here, we'll leave that for now. We're just going to overlock this side here. And then the other side here, and then repeat it on the other piece. So the sleeve we're sewing for this view is sewed what we call as a set-in sleeve. Some people call it sewing in the round. I believe that's what it's called anyway, but I call it a set-in sleeve. So what we're going to do is take one of your upper sleeve pieces, place it right sides together, match that edge that we secured with the overlocker, and we're going to sew a seam at 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch. And then repeat that for the other piece, and then go to your iron and press those seams open. Now we're going to sew a seam with one of those rectangles. So place the lower sleeve right sides together and match that overlocking line, and we're going to sew a seam here at 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch as well, and also go to your iron and press that open when you're finished. Right, so once that seam's pressed open, we're going to sew the lower sleeve to the upper sleeve, and when we do this, we're going to match those seams. But the first thing we need to do is run a gathering thread, and let's start at the top. Now, this piece is the same either way up, so just make sure when you do the top, if your fabric has a direction print or a nap, make sure the top is at the top. So let's start off by running a gathering thread. So to run a gather thread, all I'm going to do is lengthen my stitch length slightly longer than normal, and I'm going to run the gathering thread from just one side of the seam all the way through to the other side, and I'm going to make sure that I leave some thread at the beginning and end of my sewing before I cut off. I'm just going to push those seam allowances out of the way, and I'm going to stitch mine at exactly 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch. Right, so as you're sewing around, you might have noticed a notch. So that notch there is going to match a notch that we've cut directly opposite our upper sleeve here. And you can see that there. So what we're going to do is turn our upper sleeve so it is right side out, and put the sleeve inside the lower sleeve, so we now have right sides together, and you want to find the seam lines and start off by making sure they match, like so. So that is our starting point there. So when we sew, that point is going to match, and then the notches are going to match there. And we're going to pull in that gather thread to create the fullness at the top. So the first thing I'm going to do is secure the edge with the seams on it with a pin. And I know some people intensely dislike gathering. It's probably due to bad experience with gathering. And now I'm going to match the notch position there, and just notice that I'm using pins and I'm putting them at right angles, perpendicular to the seam. Just makes it a little bit easier to pull them out as we sew. Alright, so now I'm going to find my gather thread, and I'm going to find the thread that's in the wrong side of my fabric, and I'm just going to gently pull this up. Now this isn't a huge gather at the top of the sleeve, it's just a gentle gather. So that's that side, and notice I haven't measured it or anything, I've just done a gentle pull. And then I'm going to find the gather thread on the other side, which it will be in here somewhere. There we are. Now we only ever pull our threads from one side or they will lock. Okay, so we'll do a gentle gather like so. Okay. So now let's just have a look at it and adjust it. So what I like to do now is I just put my fingers like this and just gently pull it out until I have an approximate position of where my points are going to join. And now all I'm going to do is by eye gently adjust this gather so that it is even all the way across. Now if you go too far like I have, just get that thread and pull it a little bit more. Now a good trick I learnt is to do the figure 8. You can put another pin in here and then just do a figure 8 to secure that if you need to. And that gives you a little bit more help in distributing the gathers. So this fabric I'm using is highly textured. It's going to be a little bit more challenging to do the gathering, but I'm reasonably happy with that. Now just for now I'm going to pop another pin in the centre and I'll work on the other side. Alrighty, so now I'm going to sew this together. I it's a good idea to not sew it together the way I've just placed it. What I mean by that is it's easy to sew it like this with the gather on top. To do that, we need to turn this inside out. So now I have the sleeve head on the top, so the lower sleeve on the bottom. Alright, so I'm just going to start sewing from my seam position, so I'm taking out all my pins. Okay, so I've put my stitch length back to normal, and I'm going to start off by back tacking where the seams join at the underarm. Now I'm going to match the raw edges and just adjust the gather as I sew, and I'm going to stitch exactly on top of that gathering line. And when I say on top of, I'm actually just stitching to the left of to hide it, but only slightly. There is no need to take out your gather thread unless you want to. Okay, so I'm back to the starting point again. We've got all these lovely messy threads. I'm being sarcastic, of course. So I'm going to go to my overlocker, and I'm going to start at the seam and run around with my overlocker and tidy that edge up. Then I'm going to repeat the same thing again for the other sleeve. Okay, so now we're going to sew our elastic casing to the bottom of our sleeve. Fold your casing in half, right sides together, and match those short ends. My cutting's been a bit off there, but that's okay. So what we're going to do is stitch down the short edges 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch width. In the first stitch, maybe a centimetre, 3/8 of an inch. Leave a gap to be able to insert the elastic, and then start stitching again, remembering to back tack. So when we leave the gap, you need to leave the gap on one side of the centre. So when you have that, what we're going to do is fold it again so that we have right side out. So the gap is on one side. And match those raw edges. And I'll just pop a pin in. And here's my elastic that I've cut. Take your lower sleeve and place it so that it is right sides in or wrong sides out. And when you place this casing into it, you want to match the areas with the seams, making sure those seams are still pressed out. And what you want to do is the side you left for the elastic hole, so to thread the elastic through, needs to be on top, so it needs to be on the wrong side, so when it's sewn it won't be seen like that. So when you have that in place, halfway along you will find a notch like so. That notch will match to a notch on the sleeve area here. Now I'm going to sew this into place at 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch. Now go to your overlocker and tidy that edge. So now we're going to thread our elastic through. You can use a loop turner if you have it, or the good old-fashioned safety pin like I am. So just secure one end of the safety pin, and as you push this through, try not to twist that elastic. You want to make sure it's kept nice and flat. Now I'm going to secure the two ends of my elastic together by just overlapping them like so. I'm overlapping them by about ½ an inch, just over 1 centimetre. Trying not to twist them as I did this. There we are. And a zigzag stitch is really good for this. Can pull that back through its opening. And just arrange that. And if you wanted to, you could hand slip stitch that shut. You could run a few stitches, stitch in the ditch if it bothers you. You can close that. I'm just going to leave mine open. I don't mind, and I don't think anyone's going to notice because it's on the inside. So go ahead and repeat that for the other sleeve, and when that's done you can go in and sew that to the bodice of the garment. So now we're going to sew the sleeve into the armhole of the garment. So if we look at the armhole of the garment, on one side we have 2 notches and on the other side we don't have any. So what we need to do is make sure our sleeve matches the correct armhole. You've got a 50-50 chance of getting this right. Murphy's Law, no matter which one you pick up, you will pick up the wrong one. So let's just give it a go. The easiest way I find is to turn your garment inside out and then put the sleeve into the armhole right side out. Then if you come to the top of the sleeve, there's a single notch and that will match the shoulder seam there. And if you have the correct sleeve, what you will find is as you come down the back, you'll have 2 notches on the sleeve and 2 notches on the body of the back there. And that is how you will know you have, assuming you have right sides together, the correct sleeve. So now just match that side seam to the underarm seam there, and both of those seams will face towards the back. And we need to sew this into place. So this is called a set-in sleeve. Some people call this sewing in the round. What you have to be aware is there is a small amount of ease. Now the ease, on a sleeve there's a front and a back pitch point. It's not quite this position, but it's near enough. So there's no ease between here and here. The ease is around the sleeve head to enable us to move comfortably while we're wearing the garment. So when you're sewing this sleeve in, I always find it easier to start from the underarm point, and it's always easier to sew with the sleeve on top. So just make sure that those seams are sitting exactly on top of each other and secure that. So I'm coming up towards the double notches here, and you can tell there's no ease there. Now if I have a look to see where I've secured the shoulder seam here to the crown notch, there is a small amount that needs to be eased into place. So to do this, all we do is release the pressure on the presser foot. So it's a matter of sewing a few stitches and then just taking the pressure off like so. And then you just rearrange your work. So the whole time you need to make sure that those raw edges are even. And it's really important that you cut the sleeves out. Well, you cut the garment out properly. Even just going over the cut lines a small amount can hugely affect how easy or not it is to set your sleeve in. And this garment is quite slippery. It is a rayon. Although I did think about making it in polyester because there's some amazing polyester prints, and I know they're not natural fibres, but I think they are highly underrated. But saying that, there's some absolutely beautiful buttery soft linens around this season that are pretty amazing too. Alrighty. So here we are approaching that seam. I want to make sure that notch sits on top of the seam. I'm going to do exactly the same thing on our way down around the front of the garment. However, now I'm just going to hold a place around about there just to help me ease this. So I'm just sort of, just like I did before, straightening things out. A couple of stitches, lifting that presser foot, rearranging. If you struggle with this, you can always stitch in an ease thread, maybe 4 inches either side of the top of the sleeve, and that might help you as well. There isn't a huge amount of ease to ease in here. Okay, so overlock tidy that raw edge and do the same thing on the other sleeve. So once you have overlock tidied that raw edge, congratulations, you are finished. Thanks for joining me for the sew along. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more videos, and also don't forget to join my Facebook pattern discussion group where you can join in on the discussion and see what's coming up next. Thanks very much. See you soon.